Hi, everyone. I'm Melissa Harris, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the American Association of Service Coordinators. I want to thank everybody for being here today to be part of this discussion on a really important topic. Today, we're going to be reviewing the impact of service coordinator turnover on HUD housing and operations and residents. And we're also going to be discussing some best practices to attract and retain service coordination staff and some potential solutions to address the issue of turnover. Service coordinators leaving their positions and the time and effort that it takes to replace those service coordinators is something that we at the American Association of Service Coordinators have been tracking for quite some time. And it's something that we've actually been concerned about over the years. But we knew that this year was the year that we really had to step up our efforts to understand the trends that we've been seeing. And that's because in the last 2 years in particular, we've seen a threefold increase in the number of AASC membership transfers from previous to new service coordinators. So we were always seeing a high number of turnovers, but in the last couple of years, 3 times more than usual. Some may write this off as an effect of the post-pandemic economy. We're all aware that every sector of the workforce is facing all-time high quit rates with inflation and people seeking higher pay, more flexible work schedules, better benefits to keep pace with their post-pandemic lifestyles. But what we've learned is that when it comes to the service coordinator workforce, the turnover rate is significantly higher than any of those other workforces tracked by the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. Some housing providers even report turnover rates of service coordinators as high as 70% in the last 2 years. And once those service coordinators leave, it's proving increasingly difficult to fill the positions they've left open, mainly because HUD properties lack some of the flexibility to quickly meet market demands for those higher wages and flexible schedules that people are looking for. Also, unlike some other industries, when service coordinators leave the workforce and there is no one to fill their position, low-income residents in HUD housing suffer greatly. There's no shortage of evidence that the work of service coordinators improves the health and well-being of the residents and their ability to age well in their communities. Actually, a paper that was just recently published in the Journal of Gerontological Social Work highlights how service coordinators bridge the services gap for older adults in affordable housing, how important this was during the pandemic, and how important it is for all HUD housing to have service coordinators going forward. When residents lose a service coordinator and there's a gap in services, the impacts can be devastating. These residents can lose access to services and healthcare, home-delivered meals. They can lapse on their discounts for energy and internet services. Some have even been evicted or been unable to manage chronic health conditions when they lose a service coordinator. So yes, while we know that the landscape of the American workforce is changing overall, the consequences of a lack of service coordinators is dire in comparison to other industries facing similar challenges. So you may be wondering, how do we know all this? Where do we get all this information about service coordinator turnover and the impacts it has? Well, over the summer, AASC surveyed housing providers, service coordinator supervisors, property managers, and quality assurance specialists about service coordinator turnover in their companies. Many of you who are on this panel call today probably responded to that survey, and we thank you for that. The respondents represented more than 2,000 service coordinators working in affordable HUD housing. And what we found out from you all is this: that the majority of providers have seen increased turnover rates in recent years, and salary is the #1 factor in why service coordinators report leaving their positions. We've also found that delays in HUD grant funding and mental burnout among service coordinators really contributed to job security and satisfaction concerns. When service coordinators leave their positions, as I said before, residents are really negatively impacted. 90% of respondents to the survey said that they had residents who were negatively impacted when a service coordinator left and it took time to fill that new position. We also learned that to address these issues and better retain and attract service coordinators, employers are saying that they're seeking funding flexibility and training and tuition support. All of this information is outlined in a new report that we released a few weeks ago that goes over all of the results of the survey. That's actually in the chat box of this meeting. Please take some time to click on that after this meeting and look over that to learn more about what we're facing. Today, and today's panel is all about putting a face behind those survey responses and opening up the dialogue further. All the panelists you'll hear from today are facing higher turnover in recent years. And despite truly valuing and supporting service coordination as high quality providers, all of these panelists have struggled to retain and attract service coordinators. They're going to talk with us a little more about why that is and what they've done to counteract some of the barriers that HUD housing providers are facing. We have some time at the end of this discussion. We're going to be able to take some questions from the audience. So if you think of anything, please click on that Q&A box at the top of your screen and put your questions there. And then if we have some time at the end, we'll be able to answer them. If not, we can get back to you through email. Before we jump in, I do want to introduce our panelists. First, we have Tim Bete, president of St. Mary Development Corporation in Dayton, Ohio. St. Mary is a faith-based nonprofit that has developed more than 5,000 apartment units over its 33-year history and focuses on eliminating negative social determinants of health for older adults so that they can live independently as long as possible. St. Mary's Service Coordinator Program, which encompasses 7 service coordinators, is core certified by Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. We also have Brenda Carney, who is the National Service Coordinator Manager at CSI Support and Development. She is a clinical and macro licensed master social worker and has been working with low-income older adult population in the Metro Detroit area for more than 25 years. At CSI Support and Development, the Service Coordination Department employs 53 service coordinators across Michigan, Maryland, Massachusetts, and California, and contracts 8 service coordinators through Civic Works. Overall, CSI service coordinators provide services in 58 of their 61 co-ops, working with more than 6,400 members. Next, we have Stephanie Francisco, the resident services and quality assurance consultant for the Salvation Army Silvercrest Management, which covers 13 states in the Western Territory. Her organization employs 22 service coordinators who are serving 2,500 residents. Stephanie has 20 years of experience as a resident service coordinator supervisor and QA coordinator in senior housing, as well as 6 years as a manager in HUD Senior Housing. She also holds a master's in gerontology from California State Long Beach. And rounding out our group is Ara Vanderhoof, Vice President of MJ Housing and Services. MJ Housing and Services currently employs 35 service coordinators in 16 states and provides quality assurance to 68 service coordinators across the nation, totaling more than 36,000 residents served. With a background in affordable housing development, human resources, and social service program development, Ara has excelled in generating positive revenue growth, leading and recruiting the training team, maintaining program and administrative compliance, and harmonizing operations for MJ Housing and Services. So I want to thank you guys all for being here with that wonderful background. I know that you all are going to provide a lot of useful information, and we're all going to be able to learn a lot from your experiences today. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump right into these questions, and really at the very beginning, just get right to the crux of the issue. We know that turnover is not a new issue in service coordination. It's just been rapidly accelerating since 2020. And the main reason has long been that service coordinators leave because of low salary. With an annual salary for full-time service coordinators of just about $40,000 a year, we're seeing a lot of people leave this field for higher paying jobs. So really, I just want to start off by talking about the turnover landscape at your properties and what do you feel like has driven the trends even beyond or before 2020. So yeah, Brenda, let's start with you and then others can go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Melissa, for having us here. Really excited to be able to talk about this topic. I don't know if excited is the right word, but it's a good topic to talk about. In terms of like the turnover we've seen at CSI, we currently have 8 positions that have been open for an extended period of time, some of them as much as 2 years across, and we have filled a few, but we have quite a few open positions. This is not something that we normally have. And in terms of, where or why I think we're seeing some of this change in service coordination and why people are leaving is I just think the role of the service coordinator has drastically changed over the years. When the program first was developed, we were kind of information and referral people. When you look at Chapter 8 of the Management Agents handbook, it talks about, needing a bachelor's degree in social work, but then maybe not needing a bachelor's degree, and, at least having some experience. And now, as the program has developed over the years and the Service Coordinator and Multifamily Housing Resource Guide was released in 2018, we've seen a much higher skill level that is required for service coordinators. And honestly, the salary hasn't changed that much to meet that demand. To put somebody in that doesn't have at least a bachelor's with some background in being able to, assess, evaluate, look at the results of all of that, they would be really challenged to be able to do that. So I do think that's kind of part of the reason why we're kind of struggling filling these positions.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, Brenda. For MJ Housing, I think what we see is the most comparable degree is a BSW. And when you look at what a BSW or somebody with that education is getting paid across the country, the national average is about 62,000. Well, Melissa, as you said, the average coordinator is paid about 40,000. In speaking about MJ coordinators, we have just a few that meet that 62,000 threshold. And we have a pretty experienced team. And so when you look at having a BSW needing about 2 to 3 years experience in a comparable field, I mean, it is really difficult to compete when you're offering a salary, $10,000, $15,000 less than what they could go somewhere else and get.
I agree with both of you. And sorry, Tim.
That's okay. Go
I
ahead.
agree with both of you in that salary is a really big issue that we are working to overcome. We have a lot of competition with non-service coordinator industries. I think our biggest competition is the fast food industry. I was down in San Diego, saw a sign in the window of a fast food offering $84,000 for a manager with no degree and just some experience. Frontline offering 20 to 24, no degree, no experience. How do we compete with that? It's really challenging. We want someone who's degreed. We want someone who's experienced because they are working with vulnerable adults and they have access to sensitive personal information and they're developing this trust with residents. And hopefully that's what keeps them in that job is, they have that relationship with those residents. And because service coordinators are helpers, that's typically what we get. Hopefully they stay. But ultimately, as Brenda and Ara said, the salary is going to be the driving force if they stay or if they go. So that's where we're at.
We've certainly seen the position change a lot. There was a time when it was more providing a phone number, a brochure, connecting somebody, but service coordinators today are part of a care coordination team. They're working with healthcare professionals. It's a very high level position with very high level results as well. There was a time when the HUD grants and the operating budgets worked pretty well. They met the needs, but we have just seen such big changes in the labor market and labor shortages that now a service coordinator who loves their job can make 20 or 25% or more someplace else. And you just can't compete with that. That's the one thing I will say is that when we have turnover, the service coordinators feel badly about it. They love their jobs, but they have to take care of their families too. And if you're taking care of your family and can make 25% more, sometimes you have to make those decisions.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It sounds like there's some real barriers to being able to meet those workforce demands you guys talked about. For example, as you mentioned, Tim, your HUD budget, it's set annually. And so if you've got a service coordinator who comes to you mid-year and says they need to match a salary, they've gotten another job offer, you're probably not going to be able to accommodate that and be competitive. So to make up for that, I know you all have come up with some innovative ideas to try to keep your service coordinators in place. And so I'm hoping that maybe you all can share some of those with our audience as to what you've done in an attempt to retain service coordinators outside of being able to give them what they really want, which is that increased salary. So Tim, do you want to start us off and then others can chime in as well?
We've implemented a lot of policies, both to retain service coordinators, but really all staff. So we pay $55 a month in cell phone stipends. We provide flex time. We allow staff to work from home when they're doing paperwork, including the service coordinators when they're doing paperwork. Generous paid time off, training. But really, no matter what we provide, it doesn't make a significant difference if our staff can make 25% at another organization. They need to do what's best for their families, as I said. And if you have a 5 or 10% pay differential, people will overlook that because they love their job. But at some point, they have to do what's best for their families, and the pay differentials are just too large now.
Yeah, kind of to add on, Tim, we do some of the stuff that you had talked about, allowing our service coordinators to work from home one day a week to be able to do documentation, allowing that flex time and the ability to, take 2 hours for a doctor's appointment, during the day and just be able to work around that. We also have offered them, during the summer, we offered what we called summer schedules. For those of us in colder climates, can appreciate the fact that we love when summer is here because it's warm and we want to spend as much time as we can outdoors. So we allow them to have 4 10-hour work days to be able to, have those longer weekends and to be able to enjoy time with their family. Organizationally, we have, good benefits. Over the last 3 years with the pandemic, we have shut our office days down between Christmas and New Year's and given everybody that time off because we just recognize that it has been super stressful. Um, and that's for all the staff because everybody has been affected by it. But again, just to echo what Tim says, is that we can try to offer as many of those carrots that we can kind of dangle in front of them to make it worthwhile and, you know, treat the employees well and treat them like family. But at the end of the day, they need to take care of their family first. And if they can make more money elsewhere, that's where they're going to go.
We have found a lot of success in offering a competitive benefits package, especially when we talk about recruiting. So we oftentimes will tell candidates, I can't get you exactly what you're looking for, but I'll get you as close as I can. And we offer a really competitive benefits package that has a real dollar amount attached to it. So we offer 100% employer paid medical, dental, vision. We offer an EAP package that gives them 7 free therapy sessions a year and a financial advisor. We offer, a, a very generous paid time off, sick time. And when you can kind of attach that there's a financial benefit to that, and we'll go, okay, well, we can't get you, $30 an hour, but the money that you're saving because we cover your benefits, I mean, that sometimes is a really big factor for candidates. And that has been a way that we've kind of been able to retain some people and say, we would love, although I would love to give you a bigger raise, we can't, but we have continued to expand our benefits package, 401ks and stuff, to try to stay competitive when we can't compete with salary. And we've seen a lot of benefit in that.
Just like MJ Housing, Silvercrest Management has also offered a better benefit package and really stressed the importance of putting money back in their pocket through the benefit program, just as Ara was talking about. HSA is a great program that does exactly that. Pre-tax dollars put into that program. Because we're a church, we offer a 403B. It's like a 401k, and we also offer the EAP. What we really focus on is that most of the people who want to work in senior housing, in the helping field, do this because that's their calling. And so we really focus on that. We, as Tim has said, you still have to pay the bills at the end of the day, but if they feel fulfilled in their position, they're going to stay and they're going to do the work. And also for our residents, we want service coordinators that are going to be in for the long haul. They build relationships with the residents. They have those very candid, confidential, personal conversations. And those are things that really bring a benefit that you just can't get at maybe a higher paying job. They get to see follow through, which sometimes with social work, you don't get that. So we really try to play off of the non-tangible benefits of the work that they do. So that's where we try to counterbalance the amount of pay that we're offering. We still try to stay as competitive as possible, but it's hard. It's hard when they can jump ship and get a 10 to 20% increase as opposed to the average 3% increase. So definitely getting more income for these service coordinators is going to be paramount in their longevity.
Yeah, I hear lots of people in the chat agreeing with you guys, particularly about while benefits are great, salary is important as well. And we're definitely going to talk about that. But before we move to that, I do quickly want to ask you all what you're doing around service coordinator burnout and mental health, if you offer any benefits in that area, especially since these service coordinators have been serving on the front lines as essential workers during the pandemic. And in the survey, we saw the second most common reason service coordinators give for leaving their jobs is mental burnout. So essentially, they're saying, I'm not making enough money to deal with the types of stress and crises that I have to deal with each day. So, any specific examples that you all can offer of things you've done to try to alleviate that for some of your staff, I think would be really helpful for people in the audience to hear your ideas.
Well, like I said, we offer an EAP. Sorry, did I cut you off? We offer an EAP that gives our employees access to, 7 free therapy sessions. But oftentimes we also have service coordinators that just say, I am feeling overwhelmed. And as a team, we have to collectively go, okay, well, we have a mentorship program in place that they can help, talk with other people that have been in their situation. We also, again, encourage all of the time off. And I know a lot of coordinators are hesitant to take time off because they're like, oh, when I come back, everybody's like needing something. So we always try to say, well, please take the time off and we'll have somebody cover you. We'll have somebody provide coverage via telephone or whatever. If you have somebody close to you, we'll have a coordinator come in so you don't have to see a lapse in services. And those things we have found to be really helpful. And just really making sure that the coordinators see that, we have 35 coordinators across the country and you're not alone. They're all experiencing it on some level. So share ideas. What are other coordinators doing to prioritize their self-care? Is it a more flexible schedule? Is it, we get this a lot in California, the commute is crazy, so can we accommodate by giving you a more flexible schedule so you don't have to deal with the commute? And so we try to get creative around those ways. And those are things that we've tried to do and have had success doing.
Those sound like great things, Ara. We also, we do have an EAP program. Obviously we have health benefits for those who are full-time, and we always remind people that those health benefits do cover mental health services should they need to access those services. One of the things that I am constantly preaching to the service coordinators is the need to take care of yourself. And when we pay you to work 40 hours and we don't expect any more. We don't want you to work anymore. Your time is your time, and you need to kind of check out when you're done at the end of the day. And everything will still keep going on, and you'll be able to, meet the members' needs when you get back to work the next day. And if not, there's a reason why management exists, and we can, try to intervene if possible. We also, try to, which has been extremely difficult during COVID, but get together as a team, encourage people to go to the AASC conference where they can network and get to know other service coordinators, be involved in local chapters of AASC if they exist in their areas, to be able to network again with other service coordinators. Just encourage them to network within our organization. And part of, what we do as supervisors is sometimes we're just there for them. And our supervisory calls that we have are nothing to do with work, but everything to do with, maybe stressors that they're having in their life. We don't pull it out of them, but sometimes, it's an environment that they feel comfortable enough sharing in, and it's not something I'm going to stop because they're willing to be vulnerable and share with me. And just, listen to them, and, possibly, encourage, different things like the EAP or the, using the mental health services. And, and I think also too is recognizing the fact that there's some really traumatic things that happen in our properties. And when we do have, very public deaths or suicides, or just a large number of deaths. Across the pandemic, we had co-ops that lost, 9, 10 members within a very short period of time. Recognizing that that is a period of grief and trauma, not only for the people living there, but for the service coordinators themselves, and giving them that space to grieve themselves. So.
That's a great point. And one of the things that we're seeing is that 10 years ago, we had far fewer resident mental health issues than we do today. Today, 30% of our residents have self-reported mental health or substance abuse issues. But one link to this is that the job has changed because of the labor shortage, not just for our service coordinators, but for our social services partners, which is increasing burnout. So as an example, it used to be that if a resident qualified for like a home health aide, the service coordinator could call an agency and connect them. Today, that might take 4 or 5 calls. There could be a long waiting period. And so they feel like they're helping fewer residents because it's more difficult, because these labor issues are impacting everybody. And that wears you down. It makes you feel like you're less successful than you were in the past, which you are in a way, but they're helping these residents hang on by a thread. It's just critical that they be there. So the job, I think, is probably 4 or 5 times tougher than it was just 10 years ago.
Totally agree, Tim. One of the things that we're doing at Silvercrest Management is we do consistent communications. So we have weekly calls that we do with service coordinators. And this is something that they can talk about work, they can talk about the stressors, whatever is coming up. We do have an agenda that we follow. So we try to touch on all the points in those calls. We also do a quarterly Zoom call with all the service coordinators. So the weekly calls are individual, and then the quarterly Zoom calls are with all the service coordinators. And then on top of that, we have groups according to our locations, where the service coordinators get together, they talk, they vent, they exchange ideas. And this has proved very helpful in mitigating burnout. Our service coordinators deal with a lot of stressors, some more stressful than others. But every day they are dealing with people who come to them with issues that are life and death. Um, if they get services or if they don't get services, what they qualify, if they have money, if they can eat. These are things that eventually wear on people, especially service coordinators. They have it Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 every day. It's really challenging. So being able to provide support for the service coordinators, being able to have the opportunity for them to vent, that is very important. And so we really stress in that. We also encourage them to talk with management. I think it's really an asset that they have in the property. They can go to the manager, they can talk about these issues, of course, maintaining confidentiality, but the stresses that they're feeling, they can discuss that with their team members. And that's another area that we really focus on.
That's great. I love all of the things that you all are doing. And I appreciate, Tim, your comments about how the work has gotten harder in recent years just because of just issues along the whole chain of aging services, being able to fully support residents. So I think that's really important to point out. So now, going back to what you talked about in the last question and what we keep seeing in the chat is that, even with all of these innovative policies and methods that you've put in place, it's inevitable that some service coordinators are going to have to leave. As you mentioned, at the end of the day, it's the paycheck that really keeps someone coming to their position. While service coordinators absolutely love their jobs and the residents they serve, at the end of the day, if they can't pay for their rent, if they can't put food on the table, if they can't manage their student loan payments, or if they can't afford daycare for their child, then they have no choice but to move on. And as you've said, they feel really badly about that. They want to stay, but there's just other factors. They have to make the money to continue on. So can you all share with me what your experience is with attracting new staff when a service coordinator must leave their position? What are some of the tactics that you take, or what have the experiences that you had as you've tried to replace some of these service coordinators who've had to leave? So Joe, Stephanie, we'll start with you, and then if everybody can weigh in, that'd be great.
Thank you. Well, when we're attracting new service coordinators, there's a few things that we look at. First, the person that's leaving, we want to know, is there a way that we can ask them to reconsider? Because if they leave, they take all of that knowledge, all of the trust that they've built with residents with them, and that is worth a lot. So we really try to see, is there a way for them to reconsider? Is there something that we can do to convince them to stay? Is there a way we can shift tasks and roles around? Maybe they're stressed out. Besides that, if they're just set, they have to go, then we really look at the ads that we're placing. That is our first communication with potential applicants. So we really look at how are we wording that? What are we saying? How are we enticing applicants to apply with us? What sets us apart? And so really looking at that very first step. Beyond that, really looking at the, what we can offer financially, what we can offer in the benefits package, and anything else that helps us to put a good applicant in that position. So that's where we really work to do.
One of the things that we practice or we've implemented at CSI has been an employee referral bonus. The best press that you can get for filling a position is other employees recommending people that they know. And we've had success with that. We have been able to recruit several service coordinators that way. And, by and large, they're referring people to work for the organization because they know the organization, lives by its mission, and that we provide quality housing, and we're really committed to the members that we serve, and we're committed to the staff and treating them as much like a family as we can treat them like a family in a work environment. But that referral bonus has been a really good thing for us to be able to recruit some good candidates.
Well,
I know in the survey, go ahead, Ari.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say, and you can maybe add to your comments here, but I know in the survey, we heard a lot from people that despite having really great practices for reaching out to find potential employees. They struggle once the employees get in to, seal the deal, get them to sign on, or they struggle to find enough qualified applicants. So is that something you guys are experiencing too? So if you could add information about that, that would be helpful to know.
Well, we definitely are seeing that. And one of the things that we first do before we even put an ad up is just really assess what the market is in that area. Because, I mean, we've tried recruiting in Oakland or San Francisco, and the pay is just nowhere near where we would even consider. So then we have to think, okay, well, what is the salary range for this area? Is it doable? And how do you market the position when you know you can't meet that salary? So we get creative with where we post. Beyond Indeed and ZipRecruiter and the kind of the typical places that you might recruit, we reach out to the local colleges. Do they have a social work program or something comparable? Do they have a job post board that we can post the job to? Do they possibly have graduates that are ready to graduate and might be interested in work? And then we know, okay, well, you're a newer graduate, you possibly will take a lower salary. And so we really have to look at what is available local to that area so that we can try to maximize the number of views or maximize the number of applicants on an ad that we post.
One of the difficult things there is if a high school student has been working at Chick-fil-A during the summers, and then they get a degree and they come out and now they're making less as a service coordinator, less than they did at Chick-fil-A, which is a pretty depressing thought. I think what we will see if the salaries are not increased is that we're forced to the point where who we will hire are talented high school graduates with no college, because that's what we can afford. That's what we'll be able to afford. It doesn't make any sense to me that people are taking a job to help others and dedicating their lives to it and taking a salary cut from what they made in high school to do it. That's not sustainable in any way. And I think in a lot of cases, those service coordinators are going to say, well, why did I get the degree in social work? Why did I go through all of this? So we're starting to take a look at that. Are there technical school programs that we can look at? Because if the salaries don't go up, the choice will be either the position stays open for years, which is not good for the residents, or are you better off hiring somebody that's not really qualified and training them, at least have a body in the position?
I absolutely agree, Tim. We've started looking at lowering our our education requirements, and looking at ways that we can train them. And this is not a plug. Melissa has not paid me to say this, but the service coordinator, professional service coordinator certificate program that they have, we have used that for new hires as a great way of kind of like being a crash course in training for somebody who's come in that really, doesn't have, they have experience working with seniors, but it hasn't been necessarily doing all the tasks that a service coordinator needs to do. So kind of using that as a way to get people trained and up to speed. And then it takes additional work on our part to provide that additional support to them.
One thing that we're doing at our properties, several of our properties, is we have interns from local colleges that come and work at the properties, and we groom those interns to then come back to us as employees, whether that's as a service coordinator or in the management, but really working with the schools. And we work with all colleges within the university. So it doesn't have to be social work. It could be gerontology, it could be sociology, psychology. We're really open to, if they have the interest and desire to work in senior housing and work with the elderly, then we are willing to work with them. And like Tim said, and Brenda, maybe they would be willing to take a lower salary coming right out of college. But that has worked really well for us.
Yeah, Thanks for sharing. It sounds like, though, all of these great ideas are time consuming and can take time. One of the things that we have found is that on average, service coordinator positions stay open for 3 to 6 months once the position becomes open. And then also, all of you've talked a lot about training, getting to know the residents. That takes even more time. And so, in that meantime, there can be a gap in services and supports. And so, knowing that, I would be curious to hear from you guys what some of those experiences have been of residents on your properties when they've had to go without a service coordinator after having that help for many years. 3 to 6 months might not seem like a long time in the scheme of the overall life, but for someone who's been relying on a service coordinator to connect them with services and supports basic needs like food or medicine, and that can feel like a lifetime, and it can be life-changing for them to not have a service coordinator. So, any experiences that you'd be willing to share about how those gaps have impacted your residents would be really helpful. Ara, would you like to start off and share your experiences?
Yeah, we have often found that when there is a lapse in services, there's a direct correlation to delinquencies because you don't have a service coordinator there to help with rental assistance. You see a complete stoppage of critical programs, food distributions, Medicare, Medicaid recertifications and applications, things like that. But we also see over the years that there's been also an increase in substance abuse and substance abuse related issues. And we haven't really considered, well, the service coordinator role in that. And oftentimes the service coordinator is that person that recognizes that instant change in behavior, and then get loops in family, property management, healthcare providers. And so there is oftentimes a very real direct correlation between those delinquencies and substance abuse and subsequently eviction sometimes because of all of these things, because you don't have the coordinator there to kind of head off the issues once they arise.
It's really catastrophic. I mean, we've seen life expectancy in the United States decrease for 2 years in a row, and that's not all because of COVID. So let me give you an example. If a resident loses their home health aide and they can't get a new one because there's no service coordinator there, that resident is going to have problems. And I don't mean minor problems. They may not be able to bathe or do laundry or clean their apartment. And I'm not talking for a few days. They may not be able to bathe for weeks or months. There is significant suffering, and what we will see is death come out of it, and not death from a direct cause. Somebody, they can't get a walker and they fall and they break their hip. It's going to be a lot of different things, but residents suffer significantly when there's no service coordination.
I know
Agree totally. Sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Jo Stephanie.
Thanks, Brenda. I agree with you, Tim. It is, as I said before, a life and death issue. When you have no support, our residents are falling through the cracks and they are not getting simple assistance that most people could do on their own, but because various reasons they cannot, they need that extra support to be able to live independently and thrive in our senior homes. Without a service coordinator, they have long wait times for resources if they even know how to access resources. Um, you know, just for example, trying to get into Social Security, that's an hour call. You got to press 1 for this, press 2 for that. If someone has a slight cognition issue, forget it. They're done. When they first get the answering machine, it's really challenging on a day-to-day basis for each individual resident. There's mix-ups, there's errors. Our seniors are a vulnerable population. We need to be there to meet their expectations and to provide them with a quality life while they're in our homes. And to do that, they need that day-to-day interaction with somebody who can help them, and that is the service coordinator. For many resources, services, anything that they need to be able to come to a service coordinator. So having that provision is key. So that's where I think we really need to focus on getting more funding for service coordinators and getting them stable in our properties.
Yeah, I was just going to add to all the great comments that have already been made is that even when we assign a service coordinator to cover a co-op, first, the challenge that you have is that you're putting additional work on that service coordinator. And I don't think any of us would argue that 40 hours a week for most of our service coordinators is just barely enough to get the work done. So it's not like there's a lot of extra time that they have to be able to help other members at other co-ops. But also the challenge is that we see is that without that relationship with the service coordinator, the members just don't reach out to that person who's assigned. They just they figure they'll just wait. And they think it's, and they keep asking, when are we going to get the service coordinator? And, we're trying, but when the wait becomes 3 months, 6 months, 2 years, like I said, for one of our properties, it just increases so many things that they no longer have access to, and they just are not comfortable reaching out to another person because that relationship doesn't exist.
And then I also feel like you create this uphill battle for the next coordinator coming in, which we see a lot is, oh, happy first day. Here's this huge list of things that you have to do because we've had this lapse in services. And so how do you, we onboard, we train, we provide mentors and all of that good stuff, but how do you prepare somebody coming into a position where they haven't had anybody? And these residents are used to having somebody every day. And now nobody's there for 6 months. How do you prepare the next person coming in to fill that role?
And wouldn't you say that that increases the likelihood that they will leave quickly because they're so overwhelmed? It's a kind of it's just a downward spiral from there.
Yeah.
And if they've been gone for 2 years, I can't even imagine what that's like for a new service coordinator to come in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are really good points. Especially, I've just heard really heartbreaking stories over the last year as we've been looking into this about properties that have lost their meals programs while a service coordinator was gone, lost all of their MOUs with partners, and the new service coordinator coming in has to reestablish all of those. And in the meantime, a lot of residents have lost services. So I'm glad that you guys were willing to share some of those experiences that you've seen on properties. Because really, we can talk all day about the negative impacts of service coordinator turnover on HUD's portfolio and on property operations, but really it's the residents who pay the price when a service coordinator position is left unfilled for really any period of time. It sounds like you guys are saying. And so for that reason, we feel it's really important to address this issue head on as soon as possible. And so in the report that's based on this survey, the one that we have going into the chat every now and then, we provide a number of recommendations to begin tackling this issue that we've all been talking about today. First and foremost, AASC believes that expanded federal funding and HUD budget flexibility would result in longer job tenancy and provide housing providers with opportunities to meet labor market demands. Each year, HUD has experienced a large carryover in service coordinator funding in recent years, and we believe those dollars should go towards supporting existing service coordinators to ensure that they're fairly compensated for the work that we're hearing about today is so important for these residents. We're also recommending increased access to service coordinator training and student loan forgiveness for those service coordinators who are working in federally subsidized housing. Both of those items are actually included in the Expanding Service Coordinators Act, which is a piece of legislation recently introduced by Congressman Adam Smith. And then finally, we feel that it's necessary for HUD to improve program oversight and data collection. We haven't gotten to it too much today here, but this came out a lot in the survey that there's a lack of standardization in policies from region to region in HUD offices as to how you can set your salary for a service coordinator, whether you can get increases to line items. And there's also really little to no data about service coordinators. So HUD isn't keeping great data on whether service coordinators are where they're working, how many residents they're serving, where there's gaps in service coordination, or what the true costs of the program are. And so we really feel like addressing those things are going to make a big difference in addressing service coordinator turnover. And so once again, all those recommendations are in the report. And so I encourage you guys to take a look at it. I'm going to put it in the chat here again once we get back to these questions, but I do have another question for you guys. Now that you've heard AASC recommendations, I'd love to hear from you all as experts who are working on the ground every day to find out what you see are the most promising pathways for improving service coordinator retention and recruitment. You know, where do you feel there could be some improvements or changes? And I'll open this question up to everybody because I'd love to hear from all of you about this.
Well, I mean, other than increasing the salaries, which I think, is paramount, and to obviously make them paid equitably. But I do think, the idea of gathering data and looking at the actual impact that service coordinators have will help people realize the actual picture of what is happening within service coordination. It's not just, members coming down and talking and, people eating bonbons and, having a good time. I mean, there's real life things that are happening, cost savings that are happening, lives being impacted on a daily basis. People are not transitioning to higher levels of care prematurely. Just a whole bunch of things are happening. And I think, standardization of the program would be very helpful, because, there's across the service coordination portfolio, there's people that do things very differently than other programs. And I think in order to make it seen as a legitimate, profession, is that there is a national standard on what service coordinators should do and need to do. And I think that the service coordinators and multifamily resource guide that was put out in 2018 went a long way in making that standard there. But I think still there could be more done to really firm up what is expected of service coordinators.
Well, I think one of the key things for service coordination or service coordinator retention is obviously increasing the salary line item, but for there to be some uniformity with HUD when it comes to those increases. I work with a lot of really great specialists that'll say, submit the budget and provide me a justification for just that salary line item, even if it's beyond the COLA, and we'll look at it. Or when I say, the fringe line item just is not where it should be, and we as MJ can't subsidize it any further than we already have. And I've had grant specialists say, okay, well, submit the increase just for that line item, even if it's beyond the COLA, and we'll look at it. But then you take that same question to another grant specialist, and they go, oh, absolutely not. Nope, 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 nope. So I think having some uniformity among grant specialists about what we can and cannot request from year to year, what a justification for those requests should look like, would be really helpful when we try to think about increasing salaries and increasing benefits, which to me is the biggest issue that we have with recruiting and retaining SCs.
It's hard mid-year with some of the line items and things too. If a service coordinator leaves and they're not using your health insurance, and then somebody comes and takes the family plan, it almost makes you want to not fill the position till January of the next year to go through those. I think we spend a lot of time on line items that does not save HUD any money, but just takes a lot of time on their part and on our part. We are very smart about ways to spend money but when you have budgets that are kind of like use it or lose it, that's not a good thing. We are very entrepreneurial in trying to figure out, how do we help our residents? How do we connect them to things? Our service coordinators are very entrepreneurial. And I think HUD would do better to have some, lump sum budgets that where there was more flexibility within them, rather than having to talk about how many pencils you used in office supplies, or did you need to get different ink cartridges? Because every property is different. We like to think that they're the same. They're very different, and the resident needs are different too. And if we had that flexibility, I think we might be able to stretch their dollar a little bit further.
Agree with all three of you in that salaries are key. We must get those increased. They must be equitable. They must be competitive. And we really need to have an increase that is over the years in line with inflation, so that it isn't a very small increase year after year, because the longer they stay, they're almost going in reverse as far as keeping up with inflation. So we want to make sure that we are staying competitive with the salaries. Agree with all of you.
Okay, thanks for those suggestions. You've all done so much to keep service coordinator programs really strong at your properties, despite some of these challenges that you guys face. So I really appreciate that. But at the end of the day, all of those things that you guys do, the mental health programs, the benefits programs, all that stuff you do to offset those service coordinator salaries, it's not always enough, and you can't do it alone. We know that. And so I'm hoping that some of these strategies that we've offered and that you guys have offered today are things that federal decision makers can support. We have Congressman Smith, who, as I said, is working on this through his Expanding Service Coordinators Act. And I know HUD is currently working to expedite its grant process this year as a step toward keeping service coordinators employed throughout the year. But those are just first steps. We know we have a long way to go. So before we start taking a few questions from the audience, I'd like to just hear some final words from you all about what you see the future of service coordination looking like if this issue of service coordinator turnover and its root causes aren't addressed, and they aren't addressed soon. So I'll open that up to everybody.
Well, I think some of the effects of employee turnover are really looking at decreased productivity with the service coordinators, and that greatly affects the residents living there. Of course, increased recruitment cost. We spend more time or money going after really good applicants and then training them. And if they just leave, that's just lost money. It just really is a big challenge for us. And then, of course, the decrease in services. If they are not there, they can't provide services. Our residents suffer, our management suffers, our bottom line suffers. So we really need to look at really getting a good hold on service coordination, stabilizing this field of service coordination. So that's where I feel like we could do better.
I guess I can go next. I think the biggest risk that we face is increased evictions. We have to remember this is independent living. And when a senior who has health issues or mental health issues is evicted, the cost, the financial cost to our community, not just the moral and ethical cost, is staggering. Service coordinators are an amazing value, both by keeping our residents living independently and out of Medicaid nursing homes, which in Ohio costs about $4,400 a month just for one person. But when you look at those evictions, our communities are not set up to handle them. Our local homeless shelter, they can't take seniors in that have significant health issues. So they end up in the hospital. We are going to pay for this as the federal government and as communities and taxpayers one way or another. And service coordinators are by far the least expensive way to solve the problem.
Yeah, I definitely think I agree with Tim, and I agree with Joe Stephanie that we're going to have more open positions. And ultimately, our members are going to suffer. We are going to see, we're here to support their health and well-being and to enhance their quality of life and hopefully be able to make, end of life, however long it is, it could be 2 years, it could be 20 years that they're living in our properties, but their end of life to be quality and to be healthy as much as possible and to support their wellness. And we're not going to see that. We're going to see people transitioning to higher levels of care prematurely. We're going to see people who become socially isolated. And we know with social isolation, there's higher mortality and morbidity with it. We're going to see people die and people live really unhealthy, and people struggle and people be evicted, because there's not that person there to be able to provide those services.
Yeah, I echo all three of you. I think we will see the impact of the lapse in services or a complete stoppage in services manifest itself in such big ways that we won't really be able to even understand them as they're happening. I mean, and also I think we're going to see service coordinators leave, and we're going to see an uphill battle of trying to continue to say, these are what service coordinators are. I mean, how many times do we talk to somebody like, what's a service coordinator? And so we have this huge obligation to retain our staff, but get the word out about what a service coordinator is, what they do, and what they mean to their community, and how people should really start caring about this industry more than they do. And a big reason why they don't care is because they don't know that it exists. How can we go and ask Congress people or senators or anybody to listen to us and talk about funding issues or lack of funding or whatever it is, when we also are trying to explain what a service coordinator is, what they do, what they mean, the impact that they have. And so I think these issues will manifest themselves in a lot of different ways if we don't start addressing them head on.
Yeah, I agree with all of those comments. As Ara said, right now, only half of HUD senior properties who are eligible for service coordinators have one. And it can be difficult to make the case for expanding it when we're struggling to meet the demand in existing properties at times because of some of the challenges that properties are facing retaining and attracting staff. So, all of that is, really sad thinking about the future, all of the things that you guys just shared. So we're not going to end on that note, but I will say, I'm hopeful that because of our report, because all of you have participated in the survey and all of our panelists today, that, we're going to really start driving this issue forward and really taking it seriously and finding some solutions. It sounds like that's really the only way to ensure the continuation of service coordination and to ensure that residents continue living in their communities instead of, being forced out of their homes and into higher care facilities. So that's why we're here today. This is really important. So now we're going to take some time. We have about 15-20 minutes for questions. We've been getting a ton of great comments and questions in the chat. One of the first ones that I saw is from Trey, and he asked how you determine salary for your service coordinators and how much of that of your budget is based around fringe and benefits.
Well, at MJ Housing, we have to look at it from two different angles. We always do a comparable salary. We always look at the salary for that area, for this position. And then we also have to see what the grant allows. And if there's a big discrepancy, we kind of have to figure out how we can get creative in whether or not we just try to offer a higher salary and subsidize another way. But we always do a comparable analysis of salary in the area. And then on average, our fringe line item in our grants is between 29 and 31% based off of their area.
We used to look at salary surveys a lot, and the AASC salary survey was one of the primary ones. But now salary survey data is 18 months old, which means it's kind of useless for the most part. The big thing that we do is we just ask people. So when somebody leaves, we ask, will you share how much you're making? And I ask anybody that I see in related fields, because oftentimes when our service coordinators leave, they're going to work with one of our partners. It might be a hospital, it could be a nursing home. That's the only way, because these salaries are changing. Like Joe Stephanie, I think, mentioned about, the fast food prices. You just have to look at what's posted at McDonald's and know that that's the minimum. That's the quickest way. And you watch those things go up and up and up. And now that it's $20 in the signing bonus. You really have to stay on top of that, because it doesn't matter what the grant is. It matters what your local market is forcing you to pay to attract somebody. And that's different in every area. I mean, we're blessed in Ohio. Things are a little bit less, but they're going up. It's not as bad as like California, I'm sure, but it's going up pretty quickly.
And then we got another question about budgets here from Lindsay. She asks, have you all been successful getting increased requests from HUD? And if so, do you have any tips that you can share for getting those increases?
This past year, we made a concentrated effort to right size our salaries, because we had kind of people paid all over the board, depending on when the grant was written or when the budget was written. So we took the most recent salary survey that AASC used, and then looked at what we were, what our minimum salaries were, and used that as a guide for requesting increases in salaries. And we saw anywhere from, so when we submitted our request, we, with the budget we submitted, we actually submitted the salary information that AASC had from the last salary survey, and then justification why the person who's currently in that position, would require more, or need to be paid more. And we've had success in getting upwards of like our highest one that we had an increase in was a 13% increase in the salary. But again, I think part of that is, the grant specialists you work with, and we're extremely fortunate to have an awesome grant specialist here in Michigan. So, it's great to be able to, work with those who are really able to understand the needs of the service coordinators.
We've had a lot of success getting increase in grants, but usually by way of going from a part-time coordinator to a full-time coordinator. And we typically just go line by line in the grant and provide a justification for each line item that we are trying to increase. I will say this last year with HUD possibly announcing a new NOFA, all of those increases were denied. But in previous years, we had quite a bit of success getting increases. And I think what we have found most successful is in the justification, you really have to cite where that number comes from. And if you can provide the specialist with a solid reason, I mean, a comparable analysis or salary analysis is one way. But for the most part, grant specialists want to work with you. And so as long as you give them a very clear description, we have found a lot of success in getting increases in grants.
We have a question from Carla, specifically when you all were talking about some incentives you give service coordinators when you can't get that salary line item increased. And this was a question about when service coordinators work from home, are you providing them a laptop? And the second part of her question is, when you close for a week, are they paid their normal salary, or do they have to take PTO time to cover that time off when the office is closed, like you mentioned, Brenda?
So I'll go ahead and start answering that question. Specifically around the paid time off, or the time off between the holidays. No one has to use PTO for that time off. We have quite a few holidays. They get off Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day. So all the employees really are getting 3 additional days on top of that. And that is not taken out of their PTO bank or their, sick time or anything like that. What was the other part of that? Because I was going to comment on that.
Oh, yes, the other
laptop.
part was,
yeah, the laptop. So yeah, when the funding was made available through the COVID funds through HUD, we used that as an opportunity to get laptops for all of our service coordinators. So all of our service coordinators have laptops now. And we're in the process of switching over phone providers that allow us to have their phones on their laptops. So when they're home, they'll have their office phone and their laptop right there, so they don't have to worry about, using a cell phone and having to do *67 because a lot of our members won't accept block calls. So we do give them the equipment that they need besides the internet to be able to work from home.
We actually do not have any of our service coordinators working from home. All of them are on site and have been so the entire time. So we don't have any of those similar issues. We do provide laptops, but we really focus on when they're at work, they work, and then when they're off and they're home, that's completely separate. So we don't have that same situation.
That's one of the difficult things that I think we face is that when you're dealing with hourly positions and we tell service coordinators, you're not allowed to answer that email at home because you're hourly. It's very difficult. We provide the laptops, but I know they love to help people. They are so dedicated and professional, and they want to do that. And so it is hard when they're working from home where somebody's salaried, that's just kind of goes with the territory. But I like that separation that you have between the two. On the other hand, having a paperwork day, our service coordinators like that, partly because they can focus on it because their demand and the caseloads are so high. If you have your door closed, people are knocking on it all day. So it does make them much more efficient, we have found. But I think that hourly type of thing is difficult to keep them to the 40 hours because in some cases, we have one service coordinator, she has 200 residents. So that's a lot. I mean, you're never going to get through all of them. So we have to talk about how do you triage? How do you decide who needs the most help? That's not an easy thing to do, but that's where we're at because the needs are so great.
Our next question comes from Brian, and he echoes a lot of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat about supervision and if that makes a difference in service coordinator turnover. He was curious to know whether the correlation with service coordinators leaving if they're supervised by someone who's a property manager or someone at a higher level in the company versus a service coordinator manager who has social work experience and is dedicated to this and really understands the service coordinator's work. So maybe you all can talk about the setups at your organizations and how you found whether that helps or hurts or how you've tried to smooth things over if there are issues in that way.
For us, that does tend to be a big reason. We'll have some coordinators that go, oh, I love MJ Housing, but it's really difficult when I have somebody on site that isn't my direct supervisor, but perceives them as my direct supervisor. Or they perceive themselves as a direct supervisor. And so we strive to onboard every single SC in person so that we have the opportunity to sit down with management, to sit down with the new coordinator and explain really what the service coordinator can and can't do, what those boundaries look like, how they can help you. And just trying to get property managers and property management companies to fully understand what their role is. And then we encourage all of our coordinators, we have teams and they meet weekly. So bring it up to your mentor, then bring it up to your lead. And if there's an ongoing process with property management, our policy is to always mediate immediately. And we bring ownership and property management in. And I think what we find most successful is just when you bring property management in early and have the open dialogue and set the expectations for what the role is, you can really kind of head off some of those problems that we typically see come up, you know, um, annual recertifications and things like that they shouldn't be doing, but they kind of get roped into doing.
We have a very similar process as well. We have an expectations review that we do from the very beginning. Whether it's a new manager or a new service coordinator, we do this expectations review. It puts everyone on the same page. It puts every requirement, all the expectations in front of everybody. We do it with the manager, the service coordinators, our regionals, myself. And we go over this anytime that there's a change. And it really does help to set the stage so that the expectations are clear, and everyone knows what their responsibilities are going forward. So it really is a great tool that we use.
I don't think anybody likes to report to a boss who doesn't understand or appreciate their work. So our service coordination, it's a separate line of business. It's not part of property management. But we've seen the same thing on the maintenance tech side. It's harder and harder to find good property managers. Some property managers do not really appreciate either the service coordinator or the maintenance tech, and we see a high correlation in turnover when that's not there. They don't treat them as professional, where I think if you can separate those, so if your maintenance techs are talking to other maintenance techs, they feel like they're a professional services firm, and the same with service coordinators. I think there's benefits with that, but as others have said, you still have to have very clear teamwork and expectations and coordination with the property managers. But that's another thing. It's not easy. You think it's hard to find service coordinators. Try to find a good property manager with what they're being paid.
Yeah.
So it's not just one thing in the maintenance tech. So now if you don't have a maintenance tech and your service coordinator hasn't been filled in 3 months and your property manager's hasn't been filled for 6 months, you have a building that's in chaos. So it's really difficult on the residents when you have so much of that, and we're seeing that in all three of those fields, at least in Ohio.
At CSI, we're very fortunate that they do see service coordination as a separate department. So all of our service coordinators are supervised by, a social worker or someone who has experience in the social work field. Quality assurance is done by a social worker. So they do have that that level of supervision. The challenge that our service coordinators have is very unique to our model of property management, and oftentimes get pulled into property management issues by our members simply because we're the sometimes a lot of the times, besides the maintenance person, the only professional person on staff, because our members run our properties. So they know it's a co-op. They know that they should go to the president or their floor rep to be able to get the issues handled. But at the end of the day, they want to talk to a professional, and who's sitting there but the service coordinator.
And oftentimes, one other thing I would add is when you get an initial request from a resident, it's sometimes hard to tell, is it property management or resident services? We've had many residents who have dementia, and so they will report somebody keeps breaking into my apartment. Well, we don't know, is that because somebody has a key or because they're misplacing things? And it takes a service coordinator as a detective in a way sometimes to have some of those conversations and to try to see what's going on. It's not always clear cut, as it used to be. Or if it's a hoarding issue, that's partly property management. It's also service coordination. You have to have that teamwork because the issues overlap more and more. And even trying to figure out what's the best course of action for this person. It's easy just to start the eviction process, but that is not the best solution for anybody.
Yes.
I totally agree. We do a weekly meeting, service coordinators and managers, to cover those gray areas that are partly manager and partly service coordinator. And that way they can all be on the same page and work together to help that resident with their issue.
Yeah, that's our expectation that we set with property managers and service coordinators from day one as well.
We have the same thing, that they have to meet with the liaisons on a weekly or biweekly basis.
Yeah, that's great. We always promote good teamwork, really helpful. We got another question here from Trey, who's interested to know how funding flexibility supports retention of service coordinators. I know, Tim, you touched on this a little bit, being able to adjust your budget mid-year if you lose a service coordinator and the new one needs a different salary or more benefits than the previous service coordinator. But if you all, or any of you who want to touch on this area, can provide more information about how funding flexibility might help you retain service coordinators, be able to hire new service coordinators, that'd be really helpful.
Well, one example that comes to mind is when you're kind of at the mid-year point and you start getting coordinators that are like getting itchy for a bonus. And we try to say, they're performance-based. We always will look at it as soon as HUD funding comes, but when the HUD funding was supposed to be here in May, and we're like, oh, we're going to do your performance review in May, and then June is here, then August and September, they're like, where's my bonus? We're like, please wait, please hold. And it kind of is difficult. So if we had, I think, timelines around HUD funding, or if once the budget has been funded, if we could go back to a grant specialist and say, they are looking for an increase in their salary, or they've had a major life change and their benefits have changed drastically. Can we look at increasing that? If we could have some flexibility there, that would be really helpful.
I've seen in the comments a few times people mentioning flexibility around being able to use carryover dollars from the previous year, because as Tim said, also you kind of use it or lose it. You don't get to keep any of that money. So if you've gone a few months without a service coordinator and you had extra left over, you can't use that to, encourage somebody to join, a signing bonus, anything like that. So that's another example that I saw in the chat. And then I have one last question here from Karina. She asks, for those of you who are providing different work schedules in the summer, or different schedules throughout the year to incentivize service coordinators, how do you factor in HR and labor laws to provide those kinds of incentives for service coordinators in your states?
Great question. And because we do struggle with that, because we do have the labor laws in California that do limit us to 8 hours a day. In those instances, instead of offering them a shorter work week, because we can't go into an overtime situation because the budget doesn't fund it, we give them an additional day to work from home. It's what we can do given the labor laws. But we try to at least create a situation where there's some equity. And, in particular for California, I think, you were mentioning the drives, which, we don't have necessarily in all of our regions. And if we can not have someone have to go into the office 2 days a week, and, that's a huge savings for them on time and money in terms of gas. And we all know that gas is ridiculously priced right now. So to be able to reduce those expenses and to increase the amount of time that they can spend with their family is helpful.
One of the interesting things now about what service coordinators are paid, in a lot of areas in the country, it's right on the edge of between hourly and salaried. I would say, based on labor standards, in the independence of their work, they're clearly professional people. I mean, there's no question that you could make an argument that they are salaried. If the salaries went up high enough, they could be. And then you wouldn't have to deal with some of those things. It would have to go up, significantly, but that actually could be a benefit because then they could work at home and answer emails like their counterparts who are social workers and other positions like that. So that actually could be a benefit to HUD in the long term because then we wouldn't have to worry about the overtime as much.
I would hate to make somebody salaried at what we get currently paid because people would end up working more hours, which at the end of the day is making them even make less money for the amount of time that they're working. So
I totally agree. Yeah, totally agree. It would have to go up. It would have to be pretty significant.
yeah.
Because you certainly don't want to take advantage of their good nature and willingness to put in all those hours. It's really a justice issue, I think. And what is a just pay for what they're doing? And we're currently, it's certainly not a living wage for many people.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you. Those were some really great questions. We are at time. But before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for all you guys are doing to support service coordinators and for being here to share your wisdom and experiences. I think it was really helpful for everyone based on all the comments in the chat. And then I also want to say thank you to all of you who took time to be part of this important conversation today. I think this is a great stepping stone to what we have to do next. We have to keep pushing forward on this issue. This meeting was recorded, so if you want to view it again or share it with your colleagues, you'll be able to do so. I'll be sending that out in an email, likely tomorrow. You'll probably see it on our social media accounts. And then also, I will put the report in the chat one more time. I just put it in there, and then we'll also be sharing that widely as well. So please share that information with any decision makers, people at your organizations, so we can keep driving this issue forward. So again, thank you for all you do, and thanks for being here.